in a pretty not lofty place by talking about the invention of the Swiffer. Does everyone know what the Swiffer is? And just getting back to, you were asking about kind of how we can do a better job of thinking outside the box. And the invention of the Swiffer is a great story. Procter & Gamble, which, by the way, has more scientists on staff than any other company in the world, more PhDs than MIT and Berkeley combined. So it's a brain powerhouse. They wanted to invent a better mop. This is the early 1990s. And they put their best chemists on it, and they came up with new cleaning formulas, which worked great, except they irritated people's skin and peeled the varnish off with floors. So they were having some problems. So after a couple of years, Procter & Gamble said, okay, we're going to outsource this problem to a company called Continuum, which at that time was probably best known for inventing the Reebok pump. And they said, okay, invent us a better mop, solve this problem for us. So Continuum, what they do is they spend the first 9 months just watching people mop their floors, making videotapes of these women in Boston, outside Boston, mopping their floors. And the videotapes, I can assure you, are even more boring than you imagine. It's literally someone just cleaning their mop for an hour. And what they found after 9 months, what they discovered is that mopping is the worst possible way to clean your floor, that mopping is just a terrible idea, that when you actually break down the numbers, people spend more time cleaning their mop, cleaning their cleaning tool than they do the actual floor. And you watch these videos of people in these bathtubs, and they're splashing dirty water everywhere, and it's just a mess. And the reason is simple, that these companies like Procter & Gamble have spent the last few decades making mop fiber technology, really good at picking dirt up off the floor, but that meant it was virtually impossible to get the dirt out of these fibers. So you ended up just sloshing around the dirt. So they come back to Procter & Gamble and say, we haven't solved your problem, we've just discovered that your problem's even worse than you thought, that mops are just terrible. And so then so Procter & Gamble, needless to say, was not too thrilled with this feedback. And so they say, well, keep on working on it, let us know when you have something useful. And so one day, one of the guys on this Continuum team, they would bring, if an apartment struck them as too clean, they would bring in coffee grinds and just spill the coffee grinds, kind of quietly when people weren't looking, on the floor to give people stuff to actually clean. And so this guy spilled coffee grinds on the floor, and he watched this old lady wet a paper towel, and to clean it up, she didn't get out her mop, she didn't get out her vacuum, she simply wet the paper towel, ran it over the floor. And just like that, he saw that just water and a paper towel could clean up this mess better than anything else, and that triggered the insight for a system of disposable wipes. Interestingly, when they first focus grouped this, people hated it. They thought it was just like the worst thing they'd ever, like, I love my mop. My mop is great. Why would I want to get rid of it? And it took a year. They had to convince P&G to build a prototype of it before people realized, wow, this is the best thing ever. And it was then the highest rated cleaning product ever tested by Procter & Gamble. It's now the most lucrative product in the Procter & Gamble family, because basically they're charging $10 for 6 paper towels. So it's a very successful launch, and I think the larger lesson of creativity there is that sometimes we think we're trying to solve the wrong problem. Sometimes we think we have a mop problem, or that what we have to do is come up with a better floor cleaner, a better mop, but really we have to take a step back. Maybe we take that step back when we're on vacation on the beach thinking about mops. But sometimes you have to take a step back and realize the problem isn't the mop fiber. It's not the cleaner, not the soap. The problem is the mop itself. The problem is what we're trying to fix. And I think, we spend so much time looking for new answers. I think sometimes we have to take a step back and realize we're just asking the wrong question. And I think that's the larger lesson of the larger point of the Swiffer story.
I think that's really great, and we could end there, but I want to ask you one more set of questions, and that has to do with bridging the gulf between art and science, healing the wound to the modern mind that C.P. Snow talked about the turn of the century. And in some recent writing, you've talked about the development of a kind of fourth culture. There's the culture of science, there's a culture of the arts, there's a third culture in which scientists like E.O. Wilson and Richard Dawkins and others are popularizing new science, but that there's a fourth culture where the two really do marry. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as the opportunity there and how folks in this audience might work with you or others to make that marriage?
Yeah. Something I think is very important, I think, especially as neuroscience, the science of human nature, moves increasingly towards, the grandest questions there are. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? I think it's increasingly important for scientists to actually work with artists. The point being that reading Virginia Woolf isn't going to do your experiments for you, and Proust isn't going to invent Prozac. But I think it's what great art does give us is, as I was just saying, it gives you a new set of questions. It shows you which questions you should be asking. So to get back to Proust in the memory lab, I think one of the things I took away from Proust was that scientists use these very specific models to study memory. So you're looking at sea slugs, and you're just prodding them over and over again. And when you read Proust, you're left with this incredibly enriched model of what human memory is like, how sometimes it's dishonest, how it sinks and swells, how sometimes we forget stuff for reasons we can't explain, and then it just pops back into consciousness. That memory is much more, human memory is so much more complicated than poking a sea slug with a stick and seeing how its neurons remember that you poked it with that same stick 30 seconds before. That sometimes these scientific models leave so much out, and I think reading a great novel, reading Swann's Way, reminds you of all that they leave out. So I think that's one thing art can give scientists, and one reason it's so important to bring these cultures together is that it does enrich your sense of what you're trying to understand in the first place, and sometimes that's deeply humbling. I've talked to lots of scientists who have a sense of the limits of their experimental models. But I think it's important to be reminded of that. It's important to be reminded that there are other ways of asking these questions, and that the things we're trying to study in the lab, that we've got very simplified models of the reality that's out there. So that's one thing I think art can remind scientists of, and one reason it's important to bring these cultures together. I think on a slightly more abstract level, in terms of the grandest questions there are, what is consciousness? How does our brain produce these 3 pounds of meat? These loom of synapses and sloshing chemicals. How does that produce experience? How does it produce self-awareness? How does it produce the sense of being here right now? I think it's very naive to assume that science will ever give us a satisfactory answer. I think science will one day, I'm optimistic, one day will say consciousness is simply this small circuit of cells right here somewhere in your frontal lobes at this oscillation of electrical activity, blah, blah, blah. Someday we may get an answer, and you can knock out those cells and consciousness disappears, we're all zombies. Might be a scary day, but one day that day will come. But I think that begs the real question, which is, but I don't just feel like that. I don't just feel like 3 pounds of meat. I feel like a sentient human being. I feel conscious. I feel like I'm living in this cinematic reality. Where does that come from? And I think the answer to those questions, the really big questions, the profound questions, I think will always be answered better by artists. I think Virginia Woolf will always take you closer to the texture of experience, the texture of self-consciousness, than some nifty experiment in a lab with, recording from dopamine neurons. So that, I think, is the ultimate purpose of, the ultimate necessity of why it's so important to bring art and science together, in order not just to heal some academic divide, but because the only satisfactory answers we'll ever get about the biggest questions there are will come from looking at both these cultures together. Because I think, in the end, it's kind of ironic that the one reality, science, neuroscience won't be able to describe by itself, is the only reality we'll ever know, which is this experience of being here right now. And that, I think, is why it's so important to keep on funding the arts, to keep on making progress, and to keep the arts alive as a vital human activity.
Well, it's really